Is your home freezing, or is it an absolute fortune to make sure that it is a comfortable temperature? Well, this episode is for you, because we're going to be delving into why that happens and how you can stop it.
Heal Your Home with Jason Ratcliffe.
Welcome to this week's episode of Heal Your Home. Within this episode, I'm going to be discussing in simple terms what is heat loss within your home and also how you can stop it. Also, I have a listener question and of course a tenant top tip. However, first, let's discuss heat loss.
Heal Your Home with Jason Ratcliffe.
Within this week's episode of Heal Your Home, we're discussing all things heat loss. And I'm going to give you 5 top tips on how to prevent this from happening. So first off, what is heat loss? Well, in simple terms, it is the heat energy within your home that can escape to the outside or through your floor. And this can cause significant issues for both you and your family as occupants, as it can be colder, harder to heat, but also it can cause condensation and black spot mold issues within your home, as well as other nasty things that can occur. So to be honest with you, this is something that is common within a huge array of buildings. Surprisingly, brand new builds often have thermal bypass, which is where insulation is not correctly installed within a home. This can then cause issues with heat escape through tiny gaps, which is often why you see condensation and black spot mold forming within junctions between ceilings and walls internally, because this is areas that aren't thermally taped or correctly installed with, say, PIR insulation. But let's get on to the 5 top tips on what it is that you can do about this situation. So top tip number 1, insulating your roof void. It's so important because over 25% of all heat escape can come up through your roof. Something as simple as putting some mineral wool or sheep's wool insulation within your roof void of approximately 300 millimeters thick throughout, bearing in mind making sure that somebody who is a professional being able to lay this installs it, because you don't want to be blocking any soffit ventilation or covering any potential wiring which might cause a fire hazard. But by doing this very simple tip, you can save yourself a significant amount of heat loss. Tip number 2, your main walls. So the main envelope of your property, it can have up to 35% of all heat loss from your property can be through the walls. That is a huge amount of heat that can then end up going out of your walls and out of your pocket, because inevitably it's going to cost you a lot more money to keep your house nice and warm. So what does this mean? How can you do something about this? Well, to be honest, there are numerous ways that you can end up improving the thermal insulation properties of your home and the main walls of your property. Depends on what type of property you have, what type of construction, and also whereabouts you live, because coastal environments will have different situations and scenarios on how it may react to inland, for example. Whereas you really don't want to have cavity wall insulation in a coastal environment, because this can then end up having huge implications if it starts to get wet and accelerated water ingress entering into the property. However, external cladding may not be appropriate if you're in a listed building, for example, or a conservation area. So it really then needs to be where your property is and what type of property, and this is something where it is ideal to get an expert's opinion. So cladding externally, which is normally classed as rain screen cladding, this is something which comes in all shapes, sizes, aesthetic colors, textures. You can even get deep grain wood effect. And this can be a really great way to insulate your home, but as well keep it watertight. So if there are any cracks in the render or the masonry, this can then be protected by an external render. But as you guessed it, it does change the aesthetics of your home. So make sure that this is something that you can do and you wish to do. Now, internally, there is dry lining, insulation back plasterboards, things like this, which is a great way to help combat dampness and also improve the thermal efficiency of your home. But also, it will reduce the internal square meterage of your home, and it's pretty intrusive because you'd have to have fixtures and fittings removed, you'd have to adjust plug sockets, things like that. So it's really only worth doing if you haven't moved in yet or you're about to do a full renovation. But then also you have insulation, cavity infill insulation. There's all types of cavity infill insulation. You can get polystyrene balls, blown mineral wool, cellulose type paper, for example. However, all of these can retain moisture and also cause accelerated thermal bridging if they are damp, and especially in coastal environments where even if they dry out, they'll leave the salts within the wall and the insulation, which will have a massive effect on the thermal efficiency of the building. So if you are going down this route, please make sure you are very careful at what you are putting in and how you're doing it. Now, point three is around windows and doors. Windows and doors can have up to 30% heat escape from your property. Now, building regs do state, if you want to get technical, it needs to have 1.6 watts per meter squared Kelvin. That is the maximum building regulations approved document L allows for these. But even then, that is a huge amount of heat escaping from a property, opposed to walls and roofs, example. So if you've got a huge volume of lovely natural light coming in, which does seem amazing and it does have a huge benefit in its own, insulation wise is not so good. So actually we can then upgrade these to double glazing, triple glazing, secondary glazing if you can't have double glazing, and this can really help with keeping that home nice and cozy. But then you have to make sure that solar glare is not going to be an issue, so greenhouse effect, because the only thing that can really pass through double triple glazing voids is sunlight. So radiation type heat coming through. This then will be trapped within the home, and then convection currents and conduction currents cannot get back out, which is then why your home overheats. So make sure that if this is upgraded, that you then end up having some kind of mechanical ventilation system or trickle vents, natural ventilation as well, to help move that air through your property. It's really important to understand how to do that. But if you're a tenant and you can't necessarily go and change windows, then you can look at the next best thing. So you could have insulated curtains and blinds, but obviously they have their own negatives in the sense that they will block out natural sunlight. Point 4, drafts and areas of cold. Now, there are areas within a property such as under doors and poorly pointed windows and door units, drafts that can come in through all sorts of nooks and crannies in a home, and a lot of them do end up being an issue with heat loss, because as you can imagine, it can be lovely and warm. You can have your roof all insulated, your walls, your windows, but if there is a huge draft coming through, it's going to have a massive impact. So it's really worth having a look at those areas. And again, it is common sense to be able to just look at these things and actually see if you need draft strips around doors, for example, if you need to upgrade porches, conservatories, things like that. If your windows and doors are not securing shut properly, whereas if they're slightly warped, if they're older, need some more maintenance, things like that. It's really important to identify these areas. So just make sure that any areas that do require additional draft improvements, you get those done effectively. And it's always worth testing before and after, just to make sure any improvements you do are actually working and are worth the money you're spending. These tend to be able to be done whether you're a tenant or a homeowner. Now, point 5 is something which is more interior design. So putting things like reflective foil on the back of radiators, for example, it can look a bit bizarre, but actually it has been proven to have an increased energy efficiency, because it then helps redirect and channel that heat energy from those radiators back into the property, but also making sure you have a lot of soft furnishings and basically just having an environment that can help absorb that heat and retain that heat. You really want things that are radiant heat within the property, which warms up the objects, warms you up, and rather than drying out the air. So making sure you have nice radiant heat and air circulation that can then recover the lost heat as well is really important, to make sure that you have everything you need in your home to make your home as healthy and warm as possible, and it's not going to cost you the earth.
And now, a listener question for Heal Your Home.
So this week's listener question is from Michael in London. He has a flat which can get very cold in the winter and extremely hot in the summer. Unfortunately, you're not alone, and your question is very much around how you can upgrade and improve this temperature differential between the year. I mean, you're not alone there, Michael, and to be honest, especially in London and city living, there is a lot of air pollutants, there's a lot of stuffiness within the air, and it can cause quite a lot of health issues as well. So managing that can be quite important. It also looks like from the photos you sent in that there's a lot of glass and a lovely view over the London landscape, but actually this also has an effect on, obviously, heat coming in. So bearing in mind, really having some lovely radiant sunshine is really great and warming, but if you can't move that air around or there is too much of it, it can cause excessive heat within your property. So it would be worth looking at things like blinds, blackout curtains, for example, or if you have UV reflecting film. So again, you can still enjoy that really nice view, but it then just manages the heat that comes in. If these are things that you do not wish to put in place because obviously you don't want to spoil the view, then I would then suggest improving ventilation within the property. Natural ventilation is normally a great idea, but in the city of London or other cities, obviously air pollutants, noise pollutants can all come into question. So mechanical ventilations or HVACs, so heating, ventilation and air conditioning units, are something that may well be worth looking into for your property itself. This will then help manage those cold spots in the winter as well with the warm spots, and helps, if you've got your heating on, to then balance that so it's a nice comfortable temperature. But also it may be worth looking at having a thermographic camera into a thermographic inspection done, because this can then highlight any areas where there may be thermal deficiencies, whether it's in your roof, whether it's in your flooring or your walls, to then be able to look at potential ways that may be able to just make that a little bit more snug in the winter. So I hope that helps, Michael. But if you do need anything else, please just email in and we'll do our best to answer in more detail for you.
Jason's tenant top tip.
So this week's episode, our tenant top tip, is very much around accountability. Now, there is only so much you can do in a home as a tenant, because you can't then go replacing windows or things like this, but there are grants and schemes in place that may be able to work with you and your landlord so that they don't feel out of pocket, but also you feel that you have a comfortable home to live in. So it's really worth having a look on the government website through the funding options. They do change quite frequently. However, it would be amazing to have a look on there and just to continue keeping an eye, because to be honest, most landlords want to save some money and also keep tenants happy, because then, happy tenant means that they're going to have income coming in. But also any improvements that are undertaken before the improvements are done, it would be great to be able to account and record the energy usage you use, and then afterwards record that as well. And once all of the works have been done, go back and have a look at your energy usage, and then you can compare the two to actually see how significant those works have actually impacted on your wallet. But also the tenant top tip for home health as well, and warmth within your home, making sure that you have a lot of soft furnishings to make sure that your landlord's on top of maintenance so that you don't have leaks and drafts and things going on in your home. And also making sure that your heating system is well maintained, because this can also cost a small fortune to actually continue to run at optimal levels. So working with your landlord on these things is absolutely essential. So I hope this tenant top tip helps.
Heal your home with Jason Ratcliffe.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Heal Your Home. Why not check out the full array of our services at jason-ratcliffe.co.uk. Here you will also be able to find top tips and guides which are free to download. You can submit listener questions through our website or email us at hello@jason-ratcliffe.co.uk, and we'll do our absolute best to get you on our show under listener questions. Don't forget, you can subscribe anywhere you listen to your podcasts, and YouTube if you're watching along. It really does mean a lot, and your support is greatly appreciated. So thank you very much. Your health, your future, it all starts here.